Major Dominic Reeves had survived 3 intergalactic wars, but Nevele's might be what finally killed him. The storm had appeared from nowhere, a white wall of ice and fury that separated him from his scout ship and left him staggering blind through knee-deep snow. His emergency beacon was silent, jammed by something in the planet's magnetic field, and his thermal suit's power cells were dropping precipitously. "Command's going to have a good laugh about this," he muttered through cracked lips. Decorated Pathfinder, veteran of the Orion offensive, done in by some backwater snowstorm. Dominic adjusted his pack and squinted through his cracked visor. The winds howled with an almost sentient malice, but something else caught his attention, a low, pained wail that didn't belong to any weather pattern he'd ever encountered. Against his better judgment, he altered course toward the sound. 50 meters ahead, half buried in a snowdrift, lay what he first took to be a fallen ice formation. As he drew closer, the formation moved, revealing itself as a massive beast. Its hide was a mottled blue-gray, streaked with what appeared to be luminescent markings. One limb was twisted at an unnatural angle, and a deep gash across its flank leaked a silvery fluid that steamed in the frigid air. The creature's eyes opened, irises the color of lightning, and fixed on him with unmistakable intelligence. "Easy there," Dominic said, instinctively raising his hands in a pacifying gesture despite knowing the beast couldn't possibly understand him. "I'm not your enemy." The creature snarled, revealing crystalline teeth, but made no move to attack. Instead, it struggled to rise, collapsing again with a keening cry that pierced Dominic to his core. His survival training screamed at him to move on. Unknown fauna, especially wounded ones, were unpredictable. His supplies were limited. His own survival was paramount. But those eyes. "I must be losing my mind," Dominic growled as he unslung his pack and withdrew his emergency shelter capsule, a titanium sphere no larger than his fist that, when activated, would expand into a dome capable of withstanding Nevele's brutal conditions. With the shelter deployed, Dominic faced his next challenge, moving the injured beast. The creature was easily twice his size, all sinew and strange angles beneath that iridescent fur. When he approached, it snapped at him weakly. "Listen," he said firmly, locking eyes with it, "you can stay out here and die, or you can let me help you. Your choice." To his astonishment, the beast stilled, regarding him with what seemed like consideration. Then, with visible effort, it dragged itself toward the shelter's entrance, leaving a trail of silvery blood on the pristine snow. Over the next 3 days, as the storm raged outside, Dominic used his limited medical supplies to treat the creature's wounds. The beast tolerated his ministrations with surprising docility, watching his every move with those unnerving eyes. The markings on its body, which he'd initially taken for natural patterning, began to shift and realign themselves while it slept, forming complex symbols that reminded him of star charts. On the 4th night, as Dominic was drifting to sleep, the beast spoke. "You have shown kindness where you had no obligation," it said in a voice like wind through ice crystals. "Why?" Dominic scrambled upright, hand instinctively reaching for his sidearm. "You can talk." The beast's eyes gleamed in the dim light of the shelter. "I can do far more than that, human. But at present, I am limited." "What are you?" Dominic demanded, adrenaline pumping through his veins. The creature shifted, and for a moment, Dominic thought he saw something else, a silhouette overlaid upon the beast's form, something humanoid and crowned with light. "I am something hunted," it replied. "And you, by your mercy, have become entangled in affairs beyond your comprehension." Outside, the storm suddenly intensified, snow pelting the shelter with renewed violence. The beast's eyes flashed, and the howling winds seemed to form words, "They are coming." Dominic slept fitfully, his hand never straying far from his weapon. The beast's words echoed in his mind, "They are coming." Who? What had he stumbled into? He woke with a start, the hairs on his arms standing on end. The air inside the shelter crackled with static electricity. Where the creature had lain was now a swirling vortex of light and mist, pulsating with an otherworldly rhythm. Dominic backed away, raising his arm to shield his eyes as the vortex intensified, contracting inward until it collapsed with a sound like distant thunder. In its place stood a woman, or something that resembled a woman in the way that a supernova resembles a flame. Her skin was the pale blue of glacial ice, traced with the same luminescent markings that had adorned the beast. Hair like liquid silver cascaded down her back, moving as if stirred by an unfelt breeze. She wore what appeared to be armor, though it seemed to shift between solid matter and pure energy with each breath she took. But it was her eyes that held him transfixed, the same lightning-bright irises that had stared at him from the beast's face. "You're not reaching for your weapon," she observed, her voice carrying the same crystalline quality it had possessed in her other form, though now tinged with something almost musical. "Most would." Dominic found his voice at last. "I've seen things that would turn most people's hair white. Takes more than a shapeshifter to rattle me." A smile curved her lips. "Not a shapeshifter, human. I am myself, always. It is reality that bends to accommodate my true nature." She inclined her head slightly. "I am Lady Eloan, storm sovereign of the celestial court. Or rather, I was, until my betrayal." "Betrayal," Dominic echoed. His instincts told him he was in dangerous waters, but his curiosity pushed him forward. "That why you were half dead in a snowdrift?" Eloan's expression darkened, and the temperature in the shelter plummeted. Frost patterns formed on the walls as she spoke. "My council feared my power had grown too great. They could not destroy me outright, such an act would violate our most sacred laws. Instead, they bound my essence to this bestial form and cast me to the furthest reaches of existence." Her eyes flashed. "They thought this frozen wasteland would be my tomb. They did not account for you." "Lucky me," Dominic said dryly. "So what happens now? Those folks you mentioned, the ones who are coming, I'm guessing they're not bringing a welcome basket. They are hunters, sent to ensure my exile becomes permanent." Eloan moved toward him with a grace that seemed to defy gravity. "I remain weakened. The curse still pulls at me, trying to drag me back into that form. I can resist it only temporarily." As if to illustrate her point, one of her arms briefly shifted, becoming furred and clawed before returning to its humanoid appearance. She grimaced, clearly in pain. "There is a place on this world," she continued, "a nexus of energy similar to those on my homeworld. If I can reach it, I may be able to break the curse completely." "And why would I help you get there?" Dominic asked, though he already knew he would. Something about her called to him, a kinship he couldn't explain, as if they were both stranded in ways that went beyond the physical. Eloan studied him. "Because you are a protector by nature. Because curiosity burns in you like a star. And because if they find me, they will destroy you simply for having aided me." Dominic sighed. "Fair enough. But we've got a problem. That storm outside will no longer hinder us." Eloan lifted a hand, and Dominic felt a change in the air pressure. "The storms of this world answer to me, even in my diminished state. It is why my enemies chose this planet. They thought to use its volatile weather against me, not realizing they were delivering me to a source of power." She extended her hand to him, and tiny lightning bolts danced between her fingers. "Will you ally with me, Major Dominic Reeves? Your world and mine have never intersected before this moment. Together, we could forge a new path." The rational part of Dominic's mind catalogued all the reasons to refuse. His mission parameters. The unknown dangers. The fact that he was considering trusting an alien entity who, by her own admission, possessed powers beyond his comprehension. Yet as he looked at her, regal even in her weakened state, determined despite her enemy's best efforts to destroy her, he recognized something he'd seen countless times on the battlefield, the will to survive, to fight back against impossible odds. One condition, he said, taking her outstretched hand. An electric current ran up his arm at the contact, not painful but intensely alive. Once we reach this nexus and you're back to full power, you help me get off this planet and back to my people. Eloan's grip tightened. You have my word, bound in storm and starlight. As they sealed their pact, the shelter walls suddenly shuddered. Outside, the howling of the wind changed pitch, becoming a high, hunting cry that was decidedly not natural. They have found my trail faster than I anticipated, Eloan said, her form already beginning to shimmer with barely contained energy. We must move now. Dominic grabbed his pack and emergency gear, mentally calculating their chances. How far to this nexus? 3 days' journey, following the planet's magnetic lines. And how many hunters? Eloan's eyes narrowed as she seemed to listen to something beyond human hearing. 5. Elite trackers of the Celestial Court. Well, Dominic said, checking the charge on his weapon, I've faced worse odds. The lie hung between them, but Eloan chose not to challenge it. Instead, she placed a hand on the shelter wall, and the structure collapsed back into its compact form with a whisper of energy. They stood exposed to the elements, but the blizzard had transformed. Snow still fell, but it swirled around them in a protective cocoon, guided by Eloan's will. Stay close to me, she commanded, her voice taking on the resonance of distant thunder. And together, human soldier and celestial exile, they stepped into the storm-shrouded wilderness. Nevlees transformed around them as they traveled. Under Eloan's influence, the once hostile environment bent to accommodate their passage. Snowdrifts parted, ice bridges formed over treacherous chasms, and when they needed to rest, the winds curved to create sheltered hollows in the landscape. I've seen terraforming tech that can't do what you do, Dominic remarked as they paused at the edge of a vast glacier field. Your people must be incredibly advanced. Eloan gazed at the horizon, her expression distant. We do not see it as technology. The elemental forces are extensions of ourselves, a dialogue rather than a domination. She turned to him. Your kind seeks to conquer nature. Mine seeks communion with it. Not all humans think alike, Dominic countered. Some of us understand respect for natural forces. And yet you carry weapons designed to destroy, she said, eyeing his rifle. Sometimes respect means acknowledging something can kill you if you're not careful, he replied with a wry smile. That earned him a sound like wind chimes, Eloan's laugh. You are an interesting contradiction, Major Reeves. A warrior who chooses mercy, a soldier who questions. As they crossed the glacier field, Eloan's strength visibly waned. Twice she stumbled, her form momentarily shifting between woman and beast. Dominic caught her each time, surprised by how light she felt despite her powerful presence. During their second night, sheltering in an ice cave of Eloan's creation, she collapsed after maintaining their protective weather barrier for hours. The curse was gaining ground. You need to rest, Dominic insisted, helping her to sit. We cannot afford delay, she protested, though her voice was weak. My pursuers draw closer. Dominic checked his scanner. Nothing within 50 kilometers. We can spare a few hours. He hesitated, then added more softly, let me help you, as you've been helping us through this terrain. Eloan studied him with those lightning eyes. Very well. But I must teach you something first. She took his hands in hers, her skin cool but not cold against his. Close your eyes. Feel the air around you, the electrical patterns, the pressure differentials. Dominic complied, skeptical but willing. At first, he felt nothing unusual, just the bitter cold and the sound of their breathing. Then, gradually, he became aware of something else, currents of energy flowing through the atmosphere, complex and beautiful, like invisible rivers. That's incredible, he whispered. Now, Eloan continued, find the dissonance, the hunting cry. He concentrated harder, extending his awareness outward. There, at the very edge of his perception, a discordant note, a wrongness that made his teeth ache. His eyes snapped open. East of us. Moving fast. Eloan nodded, impressed. You are more sensitive than most of your kind. The hunters use distortion fields that bend reality around them. Few can detect them without training. Special forces training includes sensory awareness, Dominic said, though he knew this was something beyond that. Something had changed when Eloan connected with him, as if she'd awakened dormant pathways in his mind. She leaned against the ice wall, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. I must return to my other form to conserve strength. It is unpleasant to witness. You may wish to look away. I'll manage, Dominic said, holding her gaze steadily. The transformation was indeed difficult to watch. Eloan's body contorted, her face twisting in pain as her limbs elongated and her elegant features reshaped into the beast's visage. Throughout it all, those eyes remained the same, intelligent, proud, and now filled with a vulnerability that cut Dominic to the quick. When it was complete, the great beast lay panting on the ice, those luminous markings pulsing faintly along its flanks. Dominic moved closer, hesitantly placing a hand on its massive shoulder. I'll keep watch, he promised. Rest now. The beast, Eloan, regarded him for a long moment before settling its head on its paws with a soft rumbling sound that might have been gratitude. Dominic maintained his vigil through the night, periodically checking his scanner and reaching out with this new sense Eloan had awakened in him. The hunters remained at a distance, but they were definitely tracking something, likely the energy signature of Eloan's transformations. By morning, Eloan had recovered enough to return to her humanoid form. As the light of transformation faded, Dominic found himself staring at her with new awareness. The elegant sweep of her neck, the proud set of her shoulders, the subtle glow that seemed to emanate from within, she was mesmerizing. She caught his gaze and held it, a current passing between them that had nothing to do with her elemental powers. We should continue, she said, but made no move to rise. We should, he agreed, equally motionless. Eloan's hand lifted, trailing cool fingers along his jawline. In my world, connections between spirits are rare and precious things. What I feel with you, it should not be possible across such different species. I stopped questioning what's possible the moment you spoke to me as a beast, Dominic replied, his voice rough with unexpected emotion. The space between them vanished as they came together, her lips cool against his, that same electric current running through his body wherever they touched. It was like kissing a lightning storm, dangerous, exhilarating, and utterly transformative. When they finally broke apart, the ice cave around them had melted into sweeping, sculptural forms, responding to Eloan's unleashed emotions. That's quite a reaction, Dominic said, slightly breathless. Eloan looked almost embarrassed. My control slipped. It has been a very long time since I felt such things. A warning chime from Dominic's scanner interrupted the moment. Movement. 3 signatures, converging on our position. He was already gathering their gear. They've picked up our trail. Eloan rose, her demeanor shifting from vulnerable to regal in an instant. Then we must change the trail. She gestured, and an opening appeared in the cave wall. There is a system of thermal vents 2 kilometers from here. The energy emissions should mask our passage. As they emerged into the blinding white landscape, Eloan summoned a localized blizzard to obscure their tracks. Dominic noticed that the effort cost her less than it had the day before. Either she was growing stronger as they neared the nexus, or their connection had somehow amplified her abilities. Either way, as they raced across the frozen wasteland with hunters at their heels, Dominic realized he had crossed a point of no return. Whatever happened next, his fate was now inextricably linked with this extraordinary being who commanded the very forces of nature yet looked at him as if he were equally miraculous. Together, they plunged into the storm, the Nexus still a day's journey ahead, and the hunters drawing ever closer behind. The Nexus site rose before them like a cathedral of ice and light. Crystalline spires reached toward Nevely's pale sky, each one humming with energy that Dominic could now sense as a physical pressure against his skin. At the center stood a perfect circle of bare ground, somehow untouched by the surrounding snow and ice, a pool of absolute stillness in the midst of the planet's constant storms. "We made it," Dominic breathed, his voice hushed with awe. Eloan didn't share his relief. Her eyes darted across the horizon, her body tense. "Too easily," she murmured. They had evaded their pursuers for the final day of their journey, using the network of thermal vents to mask their trail before making a desperate dash across open terrain. The hunters had seemed to fall behind, unable to match their pace. Now, standing at the threshold of their goal, that sudden absence felt less like victory and more like the calm before a devastating storm. "It's a trap," Dominic realized, his combat instincts screaming warnings. "They let us lead them here." Eloan nodded grimly. "The Nexus would be the logical place for me to seek restoration. They knew I would come eventually. Then we need a different approach." Dominic surveyed the area with tactical precision. "How exactly does this Nexus work? Do you need to be at the center?" "The focal point holds the greatest concentration of power," Eloan explained, "but the entire structure channels energy. In theory, I could draw from any part of it, though with diminished effect." Dominic pointed to one of the smaller spires at the perimeter. "What about there?" "Less obvious, potentially still effective enough." Eloan considered it. "It might work, though the process would be slower, requiring more sustained contact." She gave him an appraising look. "You think like a strategist. 3 tours in the Proxima conflict teaches you something about asymmetrical warfare," he replied, already plotting their approach. "If they're expecting you to go for the center, let's disappoint them." They circled the Nexus, staying low and using the crystalline formations as cover. Twice, Dominic's enhanced senses detected the discordant signature of a hunter, and they froze until the danger passed. Their progress was painstakingly slow, but finally, they reached the smallest spire at the site's edge. "This will have to do," Eloan whispered. She placed her palms against the translucent surface, which began to glow at her touch. "Cover me. This will take time, and I'll be vulnerable while connected to the Nexus." Dominic positioned himself with his back to her, weapon ready. "How long?" "Minutes, perhaps. The energy here is different than I expected." "Wilder." Her voice already sounded distant, as if part of her consciousness was elsewhere. The waiting was excruciating. Each second stretched into eternity as Dominic scanned for threats, his finger resting lightly on the trigger of his rifle. Behind him, he could hear Eloan's breathing change rhythm, becoming synchronized with the pulsing glow of the spire. Then he felt it, a shift in the air, a wrongness that made his newly awakened senses recoil. Not one hunter, but 3, converging on their position from different directions. "They're here," he hissed. "Eloan, we need to move." No response. When he risked a glance back, he saw her in a trance-like state, her body partially merged with the crystalline structure, luminous energy flowing into her through points of contact. He was on his own. The first hunter materialized like a heat mirage, reality bending around its form. It resembled Eloan in her humanoid state, but where she was vibrant with life and energy, this being seemed hollow, a beautiful shell housing something ancient and cold. Its eyes were black voids that reflected no light. "Stand aside, human," it spoke, its voice like glass breaking in slow motion. "Your involvement is an unfortunate accident of circumstance. You need not die here." Dominic raised his weapon. "Funny, I was about to suggest the same to you." The hunter's expression might have been pity, or perhaps contempt. It was difficult to read a face with so few human analogues. "You cannot harm me with that primitive device." Maybe not, Dominic conceded, then fired directly at the ice beneath the hunter's feet. The carefully calibrated shot shattered the surface, destabilizing the hunter's footing. As it struggled for balance, Dominic launched himself forward, driving his combat knife, heated to near melting by a secondary power cell, into what he hoped was a vulnerable junction in the being's armor. The hunter screamed, a sound like metal under extreme stress. It lashed out, catching Dominic with a glancing blow that nonetheless sent him sprawling. His thermal suit absorbed some of the impact, but he felt ribs crack beneath the pressure. No time to dwell on pain. The second hunter was approaching from the right, moving with predatory grace. Dominic rolled to his feet, ignoring the protesting agony in his side. His military augments kicked in, flooding his system with combat stimulants that sharpened his focus to a razor's edge. This time, he didn't bother with the rifle. Instead, he activated the experimental tech he'd been field testing for the Pathfinder division, a gravity modulator designed for extreme environments. The device emitted a localized distortion field that increased the gravitational pull around the second hunter by a factor of 10. The being crashed to its knees, clearly unprepared for the sudden weight pressing down on it. Dominic didn't waste the advantage, programming a second pulse that reversed the polarity, sending the hunter hurtling upward to collide with one of the Nexus spires with bone-crushing force. 2 down, if not permanently, then at least temporarily incapacitated. But where was the third? The answer came as searing pain lanced through Dominic's shoulder, a crystalline projectile fired from behind, penetrating his armor with ease. He staggered, vision blurring, but managed to turn and face this new threat. The third hunter stood directly between him and Eloan, another projectile forming between its elongated fingers. This one was different from the others, larger, its armor more elaborate, with a crown-like structure framing its face. A valiant effort, it said, its voice resonating at a frequency that made Dominic's wounds throb with renewed pain. But futile. Did she tell you what she did to earn exile? The lives her ambition cost? Doesn't matter, Dominic grunted, fighting to remain conscious as blood soaked his thermal suit. Everyone deserves a fair trial. What you did to her wasn't justice, it was fear. The hunter tilted its head, genuinely curious. You would defend her without knowing her crimes? I know enough, Dominic said, straightening despite the agony it caused. I know she could have left me to die when we first met. I know she protects even when she's weakened. And I know your kind tried to kill her through treachery rather than facing her directly. He took a step forward, then another, placing himself squarely between the hunter and Eloan. Whatever she did or didn't do, I'm making sure she gets the chance to tell her side. The hunter launched its projectile directly at Dominic's heart. Time seemed to slow. Dominic knew he couldn't dodge, not with his injuries, not at this range. Instead, he lunged forward into the attack, using the last of his strength to tackle the hunter, ensuring that even as the projectile tore through him, he would take this enemy down with him. The impact was less painful than he expected, a cold pressure, then numbness spreading outward from his chest. As he fell, his vision tunneling, he heard Eloan scream his name. The sound held power unlike anything he'd witnessed from her before. It wasn't merely a cry of anguish, it was a command to the very elements of Nivelles. The ground trembled. The air itself seemed to solidify with electric potential. And the Nexus, all of it, not just the spire Eloan had been connected to, blazed with sudden, blinding intensity. Through failing vision, Dominic watched as Eloan rose into the air, her form shifting between woman and beast and something else entirely, something made of pure light and storm. The hunters recoiled, their confidence shattered by the raw power now emanating from their intended victim. Lightning struck from a previously clear sky, again and again, targeting each hunter with unerring precision. Wind howled in cyclonic fury, lifting the beings and slamming them against the crystalline spires until fractures appeared in their seemingly indestructible forms. And at the center of it all was Eloan, her eyes no longer merely reminiscent of lightning but actually containing it, miniature tempests raging where irises should be. As consciousness began to slip away from Dominic, he felt gentle hands lifting him, carrying him toward the center of the nexus. Through the haze of pain, he heard Eloan's voice, different now, layered with harmonics that seemed to resonate with the planet itself. "Hold on, my brave one," she whispered. "I will not lose you now." The last thing Dominic saw before darkness claimed him was Eloan placing him at the nexus center, her hands glowing with concentrated energy as she pressed them to the wound in his chest. Light flowed from her into him, bringing with it a sensation both searing and revitalizing. Then nothing but peaceful silence, as if he floated in the eye of a perfect storm. Dominic awoke to the sensation of floating. Light surrounded him, not the harsh glare of medical facilities nor the cold luminescence of Nevles, but a gentle radiance that seemed to cradle rather than expose him. His body felt both weightless and impossibly heavy, as if gravity itself couldn't decide what to do with him. "You've rejoined us," Eloan's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. I was beginning to worry the bond had failed. With effort, Dominic focused his vision. The environment gradually resolved itself. They were in what appeared to be the interior of a vast sphere, its walls composed of swirling energy patterns that reminded him of auroras. Eloan hovered nearby, but she was different. Gone was the humanoid form he'd grown accustomed to. In its place was a being of pure elemental energy, vaguely feminine in shape but constantly shifting, like a storm cloud illuminated from within by lightning. Only her eyes remained familiar, those electric irises that had captivated him from the beginning. "The bond?" he managed, surprised to find speech possible in this strange place. Eloan moved closer, tendrils of energy extending to brush against his cheek with surprising warmth. "Your wounds were mortal. To save you, I had to bind your life force to mine through the nexus. We are connected now, in ways even I don't fully understand." Dominic looked down at himself. His body appeared normal, but with one striking difference: beneath his skin, faint luminescent patterns pulsed in time with his heartbeat, echo of the markings Eloan had worn in both her forms. "Am I still human?" he asked quietly. "Yes," Eloan assured him. "But also more. The nexus energy changed both of us. I am restored beyond what I was before my exile, and you have become something unprecedented. A human with access to elemental attunement." As if responding to her words, Dominic felt a new awareness unfold within him, the ability to sense atmospheric conditions not just around him but across vast distances. He could feel the storms of Nevles like extensions of his own nervous system. "This is incredible," he breathed. "And necessary for what comes next," Eloan said, her tone growing serious. "The hunters were merely servants. Their master, the Archon who orchestrated my downfall, still holds power in the celestial court. We must confront him." "We?" Dominic raised an eyebrow. "I thought once you were restored, you'd help me get off planet. Back to my people." Eloan's form dimmed slightly. "That was our agreement, yes. If you wish it, I will honor it. But..." She hesitated. "The connection between us, it was not something I planned, but neither do I regret it. Your life is now tied to celestial energies. Your own people might not understand what you've become." She was right, Dominic realized. How could he explain these changes to his superiors? The military would likely view him as a security risk at best, a lab specimen at worst. But more than that, the thought of separating from Eloan felt wrong. As if contemplating the severance of a limb. What would confronting this Archon involve, he asked instead of answering directly. Eloan's form brightened again. "We would travel to the celestial court through ways between worlds. There, I would challenge Archon Tazral's right to rule, with you as my witness and champion." "Champion," Dominic repeated with a wry smile. "I seem to remember getting skewered pretty easily by just one of his hunters." You fought with courage and ingenuity despite facing beings far beyond your experience, Eloan countered. And now, with our bond, you have access to powers that will level the field considerably. Her expression, or what passed for expression in her current form, softened. But I would not ask this of you if you truly wish to return to your former life. Dominic considered his options. His mission on Nevles had been routine reconnaissance. He wouldn't be declared missing for weeks yet. The military had been his home for 15 years, but it had always felt like he was searching for something more, something meaningful beyond following orders and fighting others' wars. If I help you challenge this Archon, he said slowly, what happens afterward? Assuming we succeed. I would reclaim my place in the court, not as a mere sovereign but as one who has transcended the old limitations. Energy crackled around her with barely contained excitement. And you would be acknowledged as my consort, the first human to be welcomed among the celestial beings. Consort, Dominic echoed, a smile tugging at his lips. Moving pretty fast, aren't we? Eloan's laughter rippled through the chamber like gentle thunder. By celestial standards, we have moved with glacial slowness. Our kind recognize compatible spirits instantly. She moved closer still. But perhaps the human custom involves more courtship? Before Dominic could respond, she had shifted her form again, becoming once more the humanoid woman he'd first seen emerge from the beast. She pressed against him, her lips finding his in a kiss that sent literal sparks dancing across his skin where they touched. This time, when they separated, Dominic noticed that the chamber around them had responded to their shared emotions, the energy patterns swirling faster and brighter, creating intricate mandalas of light. I'm starting to think these dramatic light shows happen every time we kiss, he murmured against her hair. Not always, she replied with mischief in her voice. But this is a realm of pure energy. It responds to emotions, especially powerful ones. Dominic wondered what other emotions might cause similar reactions, but there would be time for such explorations later. For now, a decision awaited. All right, he said finally. I'm in. Let's go confront this Archon of yours. Eloan's joy manifested as a cascade of luminous patterns across her skin. She took his hands in hers, and immediately Dominic felt power flowing between them, their energies harmonizing into something greater than either possessed alone. The journey will be instantaneous but disorienting, she warned. Focus on me. I will anchor you. The sphere around them began to dissolve, reality folding inward like paper being creased by invisible hands. Dominic experienced a moment of vertigo so profound he felt his consciousness threatening to scatter, but Eloan's presence held him fast, a lighthouse in a dimensional storm. When the world reassembled itself, they stood in a vast hall that defied Euclidean geometry. Columns of light supported a ceiling that seemed simultaneously mere meters away and infinitely distant. Beings of various elemental affinities moved throughout the space, their forms as diverse as the forces they embodied. All activity ceased when Eloan and Dominic appeared. A wave of astonished recognition rippled through the assembly. The Storm Sovereign returns, whispered voices like wind through crystal. And she brings a human, others added with tones of disbelief. At the far end of the hall, seated upon a throne that appeared to be carved from solidified darkness, was a figure that radiated such power that Dominic instinctively reached for a weapon he no longer carried. This, he knew without being told, was Archon Tazril. The Archon rose, his form towering and magnificent, composed of what seemed to be the absence of light rather than darkness itself, a distinction Dominic somehow understood was significant. Lady Eloan, the Archon's voice resonated with the depth of cosmic voids. You were sentenced to eternal exile. Your return is unexpected. As was your treachery, Tazril, Eloan replied, her voice carrying easily through the vast space. I have come to challenge your right to rule. The council acted without unanimous consent when they condemned me. By our oldest laws, that makes my sentence invalid. Murmurs spread through the assembly. Dominic could sense the shift in the court's energy: surprise, uncertainty, and something else, hope? The Archon's form rippled with barely contained rage. You were exiled for attempting to merge elemental domains that must remain separate. Your experiments threatened the balance of all realities. I sought understanding, not dominion, Eloan countered. And my exile has proven the validity of my work. Behold my human companion, bonded to celestial energy without losing his essential nature. The boundaries between our kinds are not as absolute as you claimed. All eyes turned to Dominic, who straightened under their scrutiny. He could feel Eloan's power flowing through their bond, but also something else, his own inherent strength, now augmented but not replaced by these new abilities. I speak as witness, Dominic declared, surprising himself with the formal tone that seemed to come naturally in this place. Lady Eloan used her power to protect and heal, even when weakened. She honors balance, not through rigid separation, but through harmonious connection. The Archon descended from his throne, darkness coalescing around him like a cloak. You know nothing of our ways, human. Your presence here is an abomination. My presence here is proof, Dominic countered. Proof that your rigid divisions are based on fear, not wisdom. Something changed in the atmosphere of the hall, a subtle shift as members of the court began to move, some drifting closer to Eloan's position, others maintaining their distance but watching with new interest. The Archon noticed it too. His next words came as a snarl: I will not be challenged by an exile and her pet human. He struck without further warning, a lance of void energy hurtling toward them with devastating speed. Dominic reacted on instinct, reaching for the new sense Eloan had awakened in him. To his astonishment, the air around them solidified into a shield of compressed atmosphere, deflecting the Archon's attack. Well, Dominic said with grim satisfaction, that's new. Eloan smiled at him, fierce pride in her expression. The Nexus bond grants you affinity with atmospheric elements. Follow your instincts, they will guide you. What followed was a battle unlike any Dominic had experienced in his military career. Tazril attacked with void energies that seemed to negate existence itself where they struck. Eloan countered with storms of unprecedented power, while Dominic discovered he could manipulate air pressure and electrical currents with increasing precision. Their synchronized defense forced the Archon to expend more and more power with diminishing results. As the battle progressed, more court members openly aligned themselves with Eloan, adding their energies to a protective barrier around the combatants. Finally, with a desperate surge, Tazril concentrated all his remaining power into a single devastating attack aimed directly at Dominic, clearly hoping to break the bond that gave Eloan such unprecedented strength. In that crucial moment, Dominic did not dodge or defend. Instead, he stepped forward, reaching through the void energies with the atmospheric control he'd been developing, and found something unexpected at the Archon's core: fear. Not malice, not hunger for power, but primal fear of change and loss of control. Instead of countering with force, Dominic did something that left the entire court gasping in shock. He established a connection with the Archon similar to his bond with Eloan, creating a momentary bridge between them. Through that bridge flowed understanding. Tazril experienced Dominic's human perspective, the adaptability, the capacity for growth through change, the strength found in vulnerability. And Dominic glimpsed the Archon's ancient burden, millennia of maintaining cosmic balance, the crushing responsibility of decisions that affected countless realms. When the connection broke, both staggered back. The Archon's attack had dissipated entirely. Silence blanketed the hall until Tazril spoke, his voice now lacking its former arrogance. The human shows wisdom I did not expect, he admitted reluctantly. And courage worthy of the celestial court. He turned to address the assembled beings. I withdraw my opposition to Lady Eloan's return. Let her take her place among us once more, not merely as Storm Sovereign, but as Nexus Guardian, bridging the divide between elemental and mortal realms. The pronouncement sent waves of astonishment through the court, followed by sounds like distant music as the celestial beings signaled their approval. Eloan stepped forward, her posture regal but her expression softer than Dominic had yet seen. "I accept this role, with one condition. The human Dominic Reeves is to be acknowledged as my equal partner and ambassador between our kinds. What affects his world affects ours. It is time we recognize this truth." Tazril inclined his head slightly, a significant concession from one of his station. "So be it. The court will establish formal relations with humanity, beginning with this unprecedented bond." As the formal proceedings concluded, Eloan turned to Dominic, taking his hands in hers. Their energies intertwined visibly, creating patterns that resembled constellations never seen in Earth's sky. "So," Dominic said with a smile that held equal parts wonder and mischief, "does this make me the first human diplomat to the stars?" "It makes you far more than that," Eloan replied, her eyes shining with possibilities. "It makes you the beginning of a new constellation, one that bridges worlds thought forever separate." Around them, the celestial court hummed with renewed purpose as ancient beings prepared to engage with humanity for the first time. Above them, in the impossible ceiling of the hall, new patterns of light formed, a visual representation of the pathways now opening between realms. And between them, in the space where their hands joined and energies merged, bloomed the promise of adventures yet to come, across stars and storms, through challenges and discoveries, bound together by a connection that neither had sought but both now treasured above all else. "Ready for what comes next?" Eloan asked. Dominic's answer was simple and unequivocal, "With you? Always." Their kiss sealed a pact stronger than any formal treaty, creating a momentary flash so brilliant that it was said to be visible as a new star in the skies of both their worlds, a beacon of union between the celestial and the mortal, the storm and the steadfast, for ages to come.